So we're here at Airspace World in Geneva, and I'm joined here by Adefunke Adeyemi, who is Secretary General of the African Civil Aviation Commission, also known as AFCAC. So Adefunke, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Holly, for having me.
So your role is to promote safety, security, air transport liberalization, environmental protection, and overall sustainability of the African air transport sector across the continent. And we'll drill down into these separate areas because there's a lot to unpick there. So firstly, AFCAC is the specialized agency of the African Union on all civil aviation matters and the executing agency of the, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but Yamoussoukro Decision.
Got it right.
And the single African air transport market. So are you able to explain, in a nutshell, what do these two ideas mean?
Thank you so much. So AFCAC as the specialized agency for the African Union is basically the implementation arm on all matters of civil aviation for the African continent. So we cover all of the 55 countries, and our approach is a continental one to address safety, security, environmental protection, air transport, connectivity, and sustainable aviation, as you mentioned in your preamble. So in the 16 domains of civil aviation, what is considered civil aviation under ICAO, AFCAC's role is supposed to implement through coordination and facilitation with all of the different stakeholders that have a part to play in that. The scope is large, but also the coverage area is large. And AFCAC, not being able to do it all by itself because, we're kind of lean, small team, but the focus is to coordinate as much as possible. Now, as the executing arm of the Yamoussoukro Decision and the Single African Air Transport Market, our role is to implement this decision. Now, the decision is a framework agreement to enhance connectivity across African countries by air. And it is the document or the agreement that grants the market access between African states of airlines operating between African states into the other. And also to ensure that we can reduce the fragmentation that we see across the continent and increase the connectivity. And it's really important for Africa because many people don't know this, but Africa is bigger than what you see on the map over here. And by that I mean it's 30 million square miles, and that means that you can fit the USA, China, Europe, Mexico, and many other countries into the landmass that is Africa. In addition to that, we don't have alternatives in terms of road transport that covers the entire continent or rail transportation. And of course, sea transportation or waterways are not as integrated because many parts of Africa are landlocked. And so the short to medium term solution for integrating the continent is air transport. And that's why it is number one flagship project of the African Union, who is our principal organ as in terms of its projects for integration of Africa, which is one of its objectives.
Fantastic, and that was so well explained, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, of course, Africa is home to 12% of the world's population, but accounts for less than 1% of the global air traffic market. Why is this? It's a really interesting challenge.
It really is, and so it's a question of scale and scope. So the scale of the continent and the challenge is huge, and then the scope of coverage of air transport is very small. So it's actually 2% of air traffic, of global air traffic. And we have a population of almost 1.5 billion now. And if you think about that and think about the 2%, there's a huge mismatch. But if you look at other markets where you have huge populations, you see that aviation plays a role there. So if you look at Africa, we have all of the ingredients to ensure that we can really integrate using air transport. This is the thing that is so interesting. All of the 55 countries in Africa have at least one runway. So the infrastructure is there. And that runway can go from there to anywhere. Whereas kilometers of road, they stop at the end of the kilometer, and rail, and so on and so on and so on. And so the opportunity is so huge for us to expand these numbers. But the scope has been limited over time, primarily because of the market access issues. So the fact that we're not connecting as well with each other fundamentally from a a documentary point of view, from a regulatory point of view, through air service agreements and so on. So that's important. And then the enabling environment. We've got to ensure that aviation is supported, not as a charity case, but in terms of the enablers that make it survive. So things like the cost of operations in Africa. Africa is not a low cost environment at all. It's actually quite a high cost environment, primarily because of a lot of taxes, levies, and fees, and also again because of this economies of scale that you don't have. And so, if you don't have high volume, then you can't really benefit from reduction of rates that is not coming from the high volume. Then, of course, you have the issue of constraints from the airlines. So, of course, the airlines are the ones who operate the routes, and airlines have a lot of challenges in terms of securing aircraft. There's high premiums due to perception of risk by aircraft manufacturers and lessors. But then there's also the challenges that come just from operating within the context. There's lack of consistency across different states, and that increases the cost of operations, high costs, as I've mentioned already, and so many challenges. So it makes it difficult to be able to build to scale in order to support to build to scope and scale to support the scale of the magnitude of the opportunity and the challenge.
Yeah, because I imagine there's quite a lot of demand for travel, like a growing propensity to travel among
And
Africans.
you're right, there
Yeah.
is, and there's a growing middle class, and a lot more people want to travel. But even with that, it's only like 15% of the African population that's flying by air, and most of it is because of accessibility and affordability. So price is a real factor, and a lot of people just won't consider aviation at all because it's either deemed too expensive or is too expensive for them. And that shouldn't be the case, because, as I mentioned, aviation really is a necessity for Africa, and also it should be like mass transportation as it is in other parts of the world.
So how are you working to liberalize and improve the air links within Africa?
Great. So we have this opportunity, building on the Yamoussoukro Decision and the single African air transport market. We have an opportunity called the pilot implementation scheme of the SAATM, which is we call it the SAATM PIP. And the idea is to take those countries that are ready and are willing to proceed with accelerating the implementation of the YD, to move forward with them. It's an inclusive initiative because we start in phases. We take the first batch who are ready, and then we proceed with others. And so it captures as much of the continent as possible. But in the initial phase, we start with the group that have indicated to us that they're willing to participate. And this is a group of 20. So 20 out of the 54, I think, is a bit more manageable than taking everything at the same time and at the same pace. And given the fact that it's taken 35 years for us to implement, the Yamoussoukro decision in full, I think, taking this approach is a good way of doing it, and the states tell us that it's a good way of doing it. And we have good support from the 20 states who have signed up. We're taking a clustered approach as well within the 20 also, and we're saying, okay, the idea is not just for 20 states to open up their markets, it's to ensure that we actually have air connectivity that crosses regions of Africa, so that it's not just limited within regions. So there's some regions where we have a high density of connectivity: East Africa, Southern Africa, to an extent North Africa. West and Central Africa are the least connected in the region, although that is changing slowly. So the idea is to make sure that we can have crossing of connectivity from north to east, for example, from north to south, from west to south, and so on and so forth. So we've clustered the countries within the amongst the 20 into that, looking at where the opportunities and the possibilities are, and also looking at other factors where either they have agreements, or they're countries that have agreed to work together, or there's open visa regimes, and so on and so forth. So the visa issue is quite interesting. How will people move, even if the aircraft are there, even if the flights are there, if Africans have to get visas to other African countries? And that's the case. And so the rest of the world is open and welcome. And yeah, we do. We're warm, friendly people. But then Africa to Africa, it's quite a challenge. Very few African countries have, visa free for Africans, or or reduced fees for visas and so on. So sometimes, if I have my passport here and I can show it to you, I have a whole bunch, and most of it is because I'm traveling to African countries, which is my area of coverage. Have to get a visa for 30 countries in Africa. So yeah, so that's an issue. And so having an open visa regime is really important. So in addition to the structure and the approach and methodology that I've described, the idea is also to go into these countries and into these clusters to reduce the impediments to travel. So the non-physical barriers, things like the visas, things like the high cost of operations, things like standardizing and harmonizing as much as possible the rules of engagement. And the Yamoussoukro decision and its annexes are a very good guideline and framework for that. And so we're going actually to do the advocacy and to engage directly with the states to do that. And the idea is that we have a target as well, which is to increase connectivity from, well, overall connectivity, but to increase connectivity between from on the fifth freedom basis from 15% to 30%, 15% 2022 to 30% in 2025. And what do I mean by the fifth freedom? So it is the ability of an airline to move from its base in one city to another city to pick up and drop off passengers, and then to go onward to another city and then come all the way back doing the same thing. And that's really important for Africa because of the size that I mentioned. So the ability to be able to go from city to city on one ticket is really important to be able to bridge this gap of connectivity and reduce the fragmentation.
Well, I mean, it sounds like a huge task, but you must be so excited to be working on it.
I am actually, because we're making a direct impact on the socio-economic development of Africa, and it's going directly to people's livelihoods and lives. And I think too often aviation is seen as this specialized area, and it is, right? Because we have the technical standards and we need to ensure safety and security of the passengers and goods that we move around by air. But it's also more than that. It's actually an economic enabler and a social catalyst. And I think aviation has played that part in so many other parts of the world, and we've seen that. And it needs to do the same for Africa.
When Africa opens up, amazing things will happen. So what does the safety and security landscape for African aviation currently look like? And what are the challenges there? And how are you looking to help improve those two areas?
Okay, great. So once upon a time, safety in Africa was quite dire, and African ministers came together. I think it was in 2012 to come up with something called Abuja Safety Targets, because it was in Abuja. So these safety targets were to address the specific issues that were peculiar to Africa that was causing these issues around safety. And so there were several areas that were identified that was a need to focus on. We also worked very closely, of course, with ICAO, who is the sort of owner of the safety standards because of the audits that they do and the technical standards and recommended practices. And so, working in collaboration with ICAO and other stakeholders, IATA, ACI, and so on, we started to focus on improving safety in Africa. And so over time, safety in Africa has improved. Now, the global safety a threshold was recently increased at the 2022 ICAO Assembly from 65% to 75%. And Africa is currently at just under 60% on average. And so we would like to see that general figure improve. But again, having said that, it's come from a long way from the past how many years now, since 2012. It really has improved significantly. So what we'd like to see more of is, and the approach we're taking is targeting the states that have a real need in terms of improving their safety in specific elements and providing technical assistance and capacity to support those states. And so we have an initiative called the African and Indian Ocean Cooperative Inspectorate Scheme, AFICIS for short, where we coordinate a group of experts who have the experience from different individual African states through a coordinated approach through AFCAC to support a state in need. And so we've been doing that recently. We had 9 AFICIS missions last year. We have about another 9 or 10 program for this year, and it's working. We're starting to see some good progress there. Also on the ATM, of course, we're here at Kanzo, and on the ATM side, it's really important for us to focus on that. Again, reducing the fragmentation. The huge landmass is also the airspace, and so we've got to ensure that we can be more creative in terms of how we address the solutions. And we have a real opportunity in using technology to do that. And we can also leapfrog because we don't have legacy issues like in other areas. So we can go directly into enabling technology like space based technology and virtual and digital solutions that can support that.
Fantastic. And of course, sustainability is another key area for you. So,
Yes.
are there any sustainability initiatives that you're running that really stand out?
Sure. So, of course, I mean, we know this that the global aviation community came to agree on the net zero target by 2050, and Africa was also part of that agreement and part of that solution. Um, Now, one of the things that has been identified as a key area to address and reduce aviation's contribution to CO2 emissions is alternative aviation fuels, sustainable alternative aviation fuels. And because this is a relatively new area, green area, we see an opportunity from the African perspective and African continent to be involved, to be part of the solution. And so we came up with an initiative last year, which was we launched in July, which we call, again, many acronyms in aviation, which is the DPD for SAF. And the DPD for SAF is development, production, and deployment of SAF. The message there and the key point is that we want to be involved, we want to be part of the issue. And it's not about permission, it's about taking our rightful place. And so we want to produce SAF as well and not just be a source of feedstock. We have a lot of the feedstock that will be needed in Africa, but we also want to be part of that solution. And so, working with stakeholders and engaging widely across the community, especially in the sustainability area, this is the message that we have passed along through the African states, through the African community, and the initiative that we have launched, and we are, partnering with different stakeholders on this initiative. It's an exciting one. A similar approach to the SAATM is that we have a pilot scheme. We've identified 6 countries that have the potential to produce, and we also will identify the countries that have the necessary feedstock that are required for processing. And the whole point is that everybody wins out of this, so that Africa itself, it wins, but we also support the rest of the world.
That's fantastic. That sounds hugely exciting. So
Yes.
can't wait to hear more news about that.
Yes.
Now, in terms of looking to the future and then the next generation of aviation workers, do you have any initiatives that you're supporting to try and attract that next gen of airport leaders? ATM professionals.
Right. Absolutely. So it's such an important issue, and every time I go to an aviation conference, I typically look around the room and I think, And the really means that we've got to do a lot and be deliberate about building a pipeline of young aviation professionals and also creating an environment of excitement around our industry. And what I find tends to happen a lot is that we talk to ourselves a lot. And it's the same, the same teams, the same people. And it's great because it's a family and it's a community. But it's important for us to really share this with the rest of the world. And so coming to Africa now, we have this huge population, as mentioned already, and the average age of Africa is 19.
Wow.
And the average age of aviation in Africa is 59. What can I say? I mean, so we need to bridge this gap. And we need to really ensure that more people come in. And as you said, there's such a huge career spectrum in aviation. From I started out as a lawyer, and here I am. but you can be, an aerospace engineer, and whatever, a rocket scientist, a environmentalist, and someone in IT is good, business and administration. There's so many aspects that of a career that can be made within the aviation space in all the dimensions, whether it's in an airline, whether it's with the ANSPs, whether it's with the airports, whether it's the civil aviation authorities, the regulators, and so on. And so really, it's an exciting industry. And once you go in, it's hard to come out. So what we're trying to do deliberately at AFCAC is to see how we can address two issues: the diversity and inclusion that is needed, not just for age, but also for gender. So we have an initiative which launched last year called the African Women and Youth in Aviation, AWAYA initiative. We launched it informally in March, and launched it, and announced it formally to the world during the ICAO Gender Summit in Madrid last June, or was it July? And we are so excited about this. And we have different areas of intervention, but primarily AWAYA is, one, to shine the spotlight on this issue through advocacy; two, to empower the group and the demographic we're talking about; and finally, to have tangible and meaningful actions that address the problem. So we have areas of intervention, from mentorship to sponsorship to specific actions that we're taking to excite the younger generation, and so on and so forth. And there'll be more on this as we go on. But we have some information on this on our AFCAC website, www.afcac.org. You can go onto there and get some information on this. We're actually just working on some of our specific actions and interventions for this year. So I'm excited about that.
Sounds great. Now, how are you working with your aviation community in order to improve the passenger experience across the many airports that you have in your region?
Right. Okay. So very important point. And we were just talking about this. We're working on this year. We're actually focusing on this area. Now, consumer protection is one of the annexes and one of the regulatory instruments of the YD and the SAATM. And one of the practical things that we thought would be really, really powerful for us to do is to set up some kind of network of focal points in terms of the passenger experience and consumer protection issues across Africa. And so, using the platform of AFCAC and our experts working groups, where we've made a call for African states to support having some presence at most airports in Africa. But we start with the key ones. Again, starting with our PIP countries. So let's even see what that works, or how that works. In addition, we've recently established a dispute settlement mechanism, which is in Senegal, where we're based. And the idea is that the different players, including passengers, but also airlines and governments and so on, if there is a dispute around anything to do with the YD or SATAM, they can bring it to us. And the approach is through conciliation, mediation, or as the last resort, arbitration. And so the whole idea is that there is a meeting of minds between two parties, and these two parties are trying to seek a resolution on the matter so that we can move forward. And so, what are the kinds of things that can come up here, like market access issues, or issues around passengers, typically baggage claims or delays, and so on and so forth. So we've just established that. We're finalizing the setup, and this year we should be getting complaints, so we'll be open for business. Again, we have on our website a link, an email address that people can send any issues that they have to. So these are some two tangible ways that we're trying to engage more with the outside world.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you have a lot on your plate.
Yes.
Interesting challenges, huge opportunities, for African aviation. So I kind of want to wrap up with just a few, if you could talk about just the challenges that you're facing, and maybe some opportunities that you think are really coming to the fore this year that you're looking to capitalize on.
Sure. So I think the biggest opportunity, the biggest challenge is the fact that we are fragmented as a continent. And aviation can, if we do things right in the different dimensions of aviation, we can help to reduce this fragmentation and build the economies of scale that are necessary for us to have meaningful air transport in Africa that can do what it's supposed to do. And so the opportunity is the SAATM, and I'm being serious about this. This is our main developmental imperative as an African continent. If we're able to crack this, then a lot of things will follow. In the short to medium term, of course. There are other areas, of course, of development for the continent, but if we're able to crack this, then the issue of integration and connectivity would really be changed. And that would translate to not just travel, but trade, but tourism, and so on and so forth. And so it's really important for us to crack the SATAM piece. Now, we're not going to do everything overnight. So for this year, we're looking on building on the achievements from last year, which was seeing the connectivity increase from 15% to 19% from 2022 to 2023. And we hope that we can increase to get at least close to, or if not, beat our target of 30% increase in connectivity in 2025. So that's one very important piece. And also would like to see how we can close the infrastructure gap through the analysis we're doing in terms of the airspace, the infrastructure that's available. Also to support the seamless movement of people and cargo through airports, working with partners like ACI and so on and so forth, to see how we can collaborate through this one-stop initiative project. Also, the staff initiative is an opportunity, and would like to see how we progress on that. And finally, to support, African aviators in terms of capacity building, and of course, the Awaya initiative I mentioned to you. So these are the elements that we're going to cover, these areas, and I'm really hoping to see some progress and movement in these areas in this year. And that's my to-do list.
Adefunke, that was my final question. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Holly, for having me.
Thank you.